Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos. Magic is the lifeblood of the galaxy. Everything runs on it. It is widely known that all things are made up of fields of ambient energy, known as mana, and can allow for the most impossible of things to be created, including planets that go against common sense. There are a few types of mana, which interact with different fields in particular ways, creating a variety of permutations which themselves create more permutations, and thus all of reality comes to be. Mastery over mana, knowing how it behaves and reacts, is key to the creation of magical tools and devices that enable one to use it. Rumors say that some of the most prolific sorcerers in the galaxy have even learned ways to control it with their minds alone, but even this pales in comparison to the paradoxical existence of certain well-known worlds and ancient ruins. It is said that the nanomites which allow us to manipulate mana were, long ago, invented by one species which evolved intelligence far before any other. Statistically speaking, there are so many planets and worlds, a first species has to happen at some point. It is often contested whether it is statistically possible for the first species to have been so far before any other that they could rise, expand to dominate the galaxy, then fall before even a single other peer first started using tools. The odds that one species would rise so early in the tumultuous and chaotic early galaxy just seems, frankly, low. Nevertheless, the signs that they existed are there. Stars which exceed the theoretical possible ratios for mass and brightness. Worlds with rocks and elements older than anything else in their system. Planets that simply should not be able to support life, yet which remain some of the most breathtaking garden worlds in the galaxy, floating for unknown eons around a pale white dwarf. Each empire claims to know the truth. The Utaro say they were our ancestors. The Kilrexians believe one of their kind enlightened their ancient ruler. We, of the Juntian Combine, supposedly reverse-engineered the secrets of their majesty. But whether any of this is true, or is nothing more than propaganda, is entirely unknown. But I do know. On a distant remote world, I found ancient footprints on a planet where such prints should not exist, and they led me to the truth, spoke Speaker Kleebax, confidently propping himself up on the table by a tentacle. A second individual, which looks much like Kleebax but significantly more lean in appearance and with a far more vibrant hue to its sapphire skin, spoke up next. "Oh, come on, not this story again. Kleebax, you did not see a human." "I did, and you know I did, and shut up, I'm telling a story," complains the heavily augmented Tribolin. Most Tribolin prefer to retain their birth-given biology. Their blue skin and large heads were inherited from their cephalopod ancestors, especially their 8 tentacles. A rare few are insane enough to replace their vibrator tentacle. It is the most sensitive part of their entire body, capable of detecting and accurately analyzing acoustic vibrations across its entire length to form a sonar-like impression of the world around them from even faint vibrations. There exists a mechanical prosthetic which exchanges some of the visceral acoustic sensitivity of a natural vibrator for an altogether more esoteric sense, one of which enables them to feel gravitic disturbances and thus perform magic. The more churlish Tribolin engineer returned to his drink with a grumble whilst rolling his fourth eye. With that interruption out of the way, "Yes, I saw a human. I, Kleebax, second in command of the Juntian Militia's Scouting Division's forward arms rearmost cargo vessel. Being the second in command—" "Third," corrected Dave, a much taller and more lithe Tribolin with half of one tentacle missing. "Shut up, Dave!" Kleebax barked harshly before continuing. "Second in command. It was my sole responsibility to serve as the gravitic navigator. With my knowledge of mana sensory tools, I expertly piloted routes through the gravitational currents that flow between stars so as to minimize the expense of drive fuel needed to correctly warp our space bubble. But lo, imagine my surprise when I noticed quite the strange anomaly. He puffed himself up, raising and gesticulating his tentacles like a counselor at a children's summer camp telling a campfire story. A star system, impossibly old, a white dwarf at its center. Yet somehow the system still possessed a full complement of inner and outer planets. Far more than unusual, in fact. A grand total of 4 rocky interior bodies, a dense asteroid belt, followed by 4 rather large gas giants, and an extensive outer field. A white dwarf, quite simply, should not be able to hold together such an array of strong gravitational mana fields. Every time the larger bodies passed by one another, their interactions between them should have been enough to send them flying out of orbit. Yet here they remained, in fairly typical elliptical patterns. He lowers himself now, leveling all 4 of his eyes with the 2 cadets across the table from him, who seemed to be paying attention more because they felt they had to rather than wanted to. He speaks his drop, and one of them had life signs. Of course, I also had the command of the EM mana sensors. As the second in command, "Kleebax, for the love of Flugel, will you tell the truth for once?" A third, far larger and more intimidating Tribolin entered the station dormitory. Each of the cadets suddenly stood to attention, and Kleebax, of course, had no choice but to salute his commanding officer. "Kleebax had control of all our sensor suites because he was the only damned sorcerer on the ship. Only he had the necessary implants to actually interface with the neural nanomanites and interpret the data they put out. I'm sure you all know how cryptic those things can be. No one even knows who invented them, though there are always people who claim to have. In any case, he was our only navigator, and he failed to inform us that he replotted the ship's course just to satiate his mutinous curiosity." "With all due respect, Captain, as a sorcerer, it is my highest calling to—" Kleebax began, but was brutally cut off. Yeah. Pursuit of knowledge, High Council's code, whatever. If it weren't for the eggheads, I'd have you court-martialed. Point is, now we were trapped inside a highly volatile and dangerous series of interacting gravitational fields that resulted from this anomaly of a system. So many planets so close together, it's a wonder any of them are still there. It's like clockwork, more complicated than any of us could possibly imagine." Lieutenant Commander Kilnar sat down after waving the cadets to ease. He ordered a drink from the replicator, the same old private recipe he never tells anyone. A tall glass with a curved spiral shape, ergonomically perfect for his favored manipulator tentacle, now filled with some kind of dark brown, musky substance that smelled both bitter and sweet at the same time. Kleebax has spent years trying to find out what his commander has been pouring down his pipe, but every attempt to secure a sample was expertly thwarted. For a mundane, the commander is shockingly resourceful. "Anyways, what it meant was that we had to emergency land on the 3rd planet, only place in the whole system where gravity was somewhat normal. Real heavy, though. Not quite as bad as Lomulan 2, but still heavy. Was also the only one with an atmosphere breathable for Triblins. Typical mana makeup, about 78% septograms, 21% hex. Bunch of other ones, including some compounds, made up the remainder," Kilnar elaborated. Kleebax, as always, interjected to correct. "Actually, Commander, I think the 0.9% octadecagram is worth mentioning, and the planet's distinctly high concentrations of a monohexa biunigrammatic compound." Dave counter-corrects. "Water! He means water!" "Shut up, Kleebax began to shout. "Kleebax!" the commander warned with a growl. "Sorry, Dave," he whimpered in defeat. Dave smugly accepts Kleebax's half-hearted apology. "Thank you, Kleebax. Now, Commander, where were you?"
Yeah, so, anyways, standard atmosphere. A literal planet of water, and a biosphere so complex I'm pretty sure it could fill centuries of textbooks. I could not count the number of unique bugs I saw on the suckers of all my tentacles combined. The only thing that stopped me from going in the water was the noise.
He winced just from the memory of it. Noise? One of the cadets queried. He nodded.
Yeah, I'm a tribalin. Not exactly a deep sea species, but we've got pretty good hearing, so I'm told. Helps us navigate in deep waters. I put one vibrator in that water and damned near lost it for good. Pretty sure I counted, what was it?
1,000, Dave reminded him. He nodded to Dave in thanks.
Yeah, that's right. Something like 1,000 unique species of various paradigms within a 2-Clark radius.
2 Clarks! An Ogreite cadet exclaimed, catching himself and bowing both of his heads in apology for the outburst. Ogreites were tall, burly individuals, always born as conjoined twins, 2 heads sharing one body. Though each head only has half a brain, literally one handles speech and most logical reasoning, the other is the artistic and impulsive side that never speaks. But Kilnar wasn't bothered by it. He did not call them out for their transgression.
Yep, just 2, all strewn along this gargantuan structure that stretched even further than I could hear. Some kind of organic wall, judging by the shape of it. Not that I could make it out too well through the sheer pressure of that many different species, all clicking and moaning at once. In any case, I was busy marveling at this impossible planet. I knew right off the bat this was going to get my crew one hell of a finder's commission. Biggest ancient ruin discovery in the last century, possibly ever. 8 entire planets, 4 of them garden worlds, even if their atmospheres weren't specifically tribalin breathable, with the other 4 being gas giant hosts to a plethora of garden moons. Not to mention that after we'd finally risen back to orbit, we did a more comprehensive scan and found thousands of residual signals from countless ancient ruin outposts scattered amongst the asteroids, planetoids, and outer belts, all orbiting impossibly around a cold dwarf star. It shouldn't be possible. It was beyond anything I'd ever seen or even heard of.
Then Kleebax ran off, Dave interjected. Kleebax raised his tentacles angrily. I did not run off. I found a set of ancient footprints preserved in the rocks beneath the landing ramp, which led to me noticing a very concerning shape in the distance. So naturally Dave cut him off. You ran off, Kleebax, too excited at the prospect of human ruins to hold it in your suit. I wasn't inclined to go off dying with him, so I stayed behind with the commander to figure out a way through the fields. A task not made easier by the absence of our flugel-damned navigator.
Unfortunately, this is where we don't have much of a choice but to take Kleebax at his word. Tell them the way you told me, Kleebax, and don't go embellishing it again,
the commander commanded tersely. His previous enthusiasm curbed, he plugged his mechanical vibrator into a port in the table he and the cadets were seated at. The commander and Dave both elected to sit at a separate table in the same room, as far from Kleebax as possible. Kleebax continued, though his tone was much less energetic now, almost depressed. Fine, I'll start again from the beginning then. Kleebax opened a holo projector on a nearby table, connecting his metallicized vibrator tentacle to a port on the side of it. Supposedly, although the surgery that allows him to interface with the nanomanites also cost him his species' prodigious sense of hearing, because it was interfacing with such a sensitive sensory organ, it's supposed to give him a far sharper degree of communication with the nanomachines that all sorcerers use to interface with Empire-grade technology which proliferate every environment. He created an image with almost stunning detail, and in full color, too. The cadets were thoroughly impressed. The captain and Dave both rolled all 4 of their eyes. Cadets were too easy. Kleebax, for his part, was beaming at their awe. The first thing I did when we landed was disembark. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to set the first sucker on ancient ruins, to be the pioneer who sets the stage for all others to come. While the commander had certainly identified a stunning breadth of life in the water, my nano-manite-enhanced vibrator could detect far, far more. The very land itself spoke to me, poured unto my mind its deepest secrets. I identified an impossible diversity of microbial life forms in the soil, literally millions of unique strains, bacterials, fungals, virals, primitive plant and animal cells, invertebrates, vertebrates, you name the taxonomy, it existed here, all of it. It was as if this planet contained every single possible form of life that existed. Theoretically, its ecosystem should have collapsed and simplified several times over. Yet somehow, some way, it persisted in its complexity. A carefully struck balance of perfect, impossible harmony. Chaos, bound and predicted. I knew it could not be natural. I knew it must have been by design.
Kleebax, what did I just tell you?
Commander Kilnar nearly snarled. Kleebax threw 3 of his tentacles into the air in frustration. Ah, that is not embellishment. It is Flugel's honest truth. There really are millions of unique species down there, strewn about the entirety of the taxonomic kingdom. I tell no lie. It can't have been natural. Kilnar just rubbed a single tentacle over his left pair of eyes and sighed.
Fine. Just try not to keep us here for the rest of the cycle.
Kleebax took however small a victory he could. Very well, I shall spare you the interesting details. So, despite the theoretical chaos of this impossibly complex environment, I discovered something even more impossible. The odds of that is like flipping a Juntian $50 credit and having it land tails hundreds of times in a row. The hologram shifted, showing a near-perfect recreation of Kleebax himself, amidst a somewhat dense coastal jungle, leaning down and investigating what seemed to be a hardened track of mud in a clearing. In the mud was what clearly appeared to be footprints, strange ones, relatively thin ovals pointed on one end, almost shaped like reptilian eggs. The hardened mud was itself strange-looking, pitch black like tar. Kleebax answered the questions looming in the minds of his now enraptured audience of cadets and disinterested superiors. It's not mud! In fact, it is an incredibly complex hexachidecagrammic compound, like igneous rock, but artificial, and with hexagrammic compounds mixed in to strengthen it. I did a very quick hexagrammic dating and identified that it was millions of cycles old, likely formed before the local star had even turned into a white dwarf. Kleebax gave a moment for the cadets to ooh and awe at him, while his superiors just rolled their eyes. The hologram shifts as it now follows a moving Kleebax through his jungle environment, following a trail over bushes and branches, past walls of leaves. While he spared the spoken details of his findings, he seemingly made sure to include close-up views of the stunning variety of life he passed by. Dozens of different kinds of trees, many wrapped up in vines, bushes, and mosses. Fungus littering the darkened soil of the ground, only the trail left uncovered. Puzzlingly so for the cadets who paid attention in college for archaeology. In such an active ecosphere, such things should have been rapidly covered up. It was as if the jungle was avoiding it. The distinct lack of any larger animal species ever approaching Kleebax seemed to support this idea. Naturally, being a scholar, I had no choice but to follow them. I did not run off. In fact, I was quite methodical in my approach. I could not risk damaging the preserved prince. I spent the better part of that planet's entire bright cycle following the trail, which also meant it doubled as the single longest consecutive trail of preserved tread prints ever discovered. This entire world was a treasure trove of life-changing discoveries and impossible finds, as if all the luck in the universe was poured into this one single planet. Nevertheless, The trail did end, but not before leading me somewhere. The hologram shifted again, this time to a view of a seismic scan, descending beneath the ground to create a sort of slice view of the area beneath Kleebax, revealing what appeared to be an extraordinarily large system of underground caverns, spanning unimaginable distance. Dozens, hundreds of Clarks, and that was just in depth. Kleebax's scan simply could not reach far enough to discern where the edge of these caverns was horizontally. Although they were clearly damaged severely by unknowable aeons of tectonic movement, the roughly even, symmetrical, and distinct quadratic shapes of it were easy enough even for untrained eyes to see. It was like staring at the blueprints of a military bunker of unfathomable scale. Yet another impossible find. Even theoretically, how could I find preserved prints on the surface, bare meters away from buried ruins? The only explanation is that they were built underground. For what purpose? I do not know. Perhaps to preserve them? In any case, my seismic scan had revealed to me the location of an entrance. A small part of the top of these hollow structures that barely peeked out of the ground, and it was nearby to boot. Took me barely one interin to reach it. I was so excited I'd subconsciously begun coloring the nanomanites around me. Such was their density and strength that they could respond to emotions. Even now, Kleebax's normally pale blue skin was traced with colorful lines, an indicator that the nanomites in his blood were responding to his emotions at this very moment. I descended into the ruins, carefully, with a light cantrip at the ready so I could thoroughly investigate every little detail I came across. Unfortunately, unlike other ruined sites in the galaxy, these structures were quite plain. No drawings, no markings, not even signs of some kind of artistic style. Just plain, straight-edged halls and corridors. Cave-ins in edge rooms where I presume viewing ports used to be, though I don't know what it was they wished to see in an underground space. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. These had to be human. There simply were no catalogs of ruins like these. Even the most boring and garish of civilizations put at least some care into how their structures look. The amount of boredom in the design could only point to a race that was exceptionally long-lived, or which had far, far more pressing concerns than aesthetics. The image shifted, following along with Kleebax's words like a reel of footage from his perspective. It showed an array of colors and other objects, a brief glimpse into how Kleebax sees the world around him. The trails of magic and mana that flow in and around everything, as visible to him as paint, light, and the stars themselves. The nanomanites in the air all seemed to be flowing from somewhere, and Kleebax appeared to be following that flow to its source. Eventually, after several interins and what must have been at least an entire Clark of slithering, I reached what I believed to be the bottom of the structure. There I found a fully intact databank. It even had a nanomanite port that was compatible with my vibrator, an unmistakable clue and irrefutable proof that humans invented magic. The commander took the opportunity to interject.
So, like the damned idiot he is, he stuck his vibrator somewhere it didn't belong.
Kleebax retorted defensively, "How was I supposed to know that an ancient ruin like this would have intact self-destruct mechanisms? There's no way something like that could have survived that long, not even human." The commander shrugged and pointed a tentacle accusingly.
Well, it did. I'm surprised you made it far enough to avoid the blast.
Well, I am a sorcerer. I have at least a few tricks up my sleeve, he answered matter-of-factly. Dave chuckled. I can't wait for your personal teleporter to turn you inside out. Kleebax once again shouted defensively. It worked! You can't say it didn't! Piffed this time, Dave continued to mock. Kleebax shook his head and turned back to the cadets, who were visibly shaking with questions their training prevented them from asking without being prompted. But yes, it had a self-destruct alarm. Whoever built the ruins didn't want anybody finding them. Luckily for me, I am one of the best sorcerers to have ever graced the galaxy, and was able to retrieve this snippet of an ancient holophile." The hologram changed again, shifting this time from Kleebax's perspective to a third-person perspective of a most strange-looking creature. The cadets' eyes widened. None of them had ever seen anything like it. Bipedal, 5 limbs extending from a centralized abdomen. One of them very short and round, seemingly a head which includes all of its sensory organs? Very unusual. How could such a species survive getting its head removed? Quite the vulnerability. No apparent motive organs, implying gravity-assisted movement. Odder still. Relying on local gravity in order to move certainly works, until you go to space, that is. Nearly all species self-modify to a far more efficient and generally usable form of movement once they achieve space travel. How absurd would it be to generate an artificial gravity well just so you could move around your own ship? What did they do? Float? What surprised the cadets even more, causing some of them to visibly gasp only to then cover their respiratory orifices, was when the hologram spoke. Kleebax was practically oozing smugness, along with other fluids. Not just a holophile, but a holophile with attached audio. The language was oddly easy to understand. The translator had no difficulty whatsoever, almost as if it were somehow already catalogued in the Council's primordial Akashic. A database of information that was created ages ago by a small group of dedicated researchers who, with it, founded the High Academic Council and invented magic. There were rumors, however, that it in fact predated the Council and was discovered rather than created. And it seems this holophile alone proves them. This was the discovery of the millennium. It's no wonder Kleebax and his crewmates were here at the Academy. They were practically celebrities. Despite the translation, there were quite a few words that no one understood. Seemingly, whichever words were being used to measure time and distance, among other things. Not uncommon for ancient species.
"Cannot sustain this! Each year the population keeps growing. Even with the unit laws, unregistered births are exponential. Quite frankly, it's only a matter of time before—"
The audio cuts out, jumping to what appears to be a far later point. This time, a second one of the creatures is in view, slightly taller, with a distinctly different hue to its skin, as well as its obvious EM organs and whatever that strange fuzz on the top of its head was.
"The elixir will solve it. A genetic recombinator that will reset the clock and introduce a new life paradigm. One where it moderates itself, where growth is automatically curbed so that it does not outstrip the anthropic capabilities of the nanomachines,"
the creature stated. "Your elixir's suicide! There's no telling what the ramifications will be. We could be looking at galactic extinction!" the original creature exclaimed.
"Or the dawn of a new age. An age where we aren't alone in the universe. An age where people can live, die, and exist in harmonious balance."
Balance with what? Death? We spent centuries solving cancer and age, and now you just want to undo it all? What if we become worse?
Then we become worse. Better a galaxy filled with diversity and conflict than one filled with endless screaming tides of people. A galaxy where governments have to go to extreme measures just to stop people from having kids. A galaxy where we have to not just stand by and watch people die, but actively help the process along just so we don't die with them. Each year, worlds collapse into war and infighting over depleting resources. Stars snuff into dwarves as energy needs skyrocket. We've even...
Another cutout, shorter this time, jumping to what seems to be a latter half of the same conversation. The original creature appears shocked to a fault. So the rumors are true. The black holes aren't truly infinite.
No, it appears even they have a limit. That is the truth behind the collapse of the Matryoshka. Their whole died. It was sudden, spontaneous. No one could have predicted it. The UGN went to great lengths to cover it up.
Why? Why are you telling me this?
Because I believe you, and you alone, are worthy to.
Yet another cut. This time, the shorter of the two creatures is alone, and the area around it appears to be worn down heavily. God damn it all! You crazed fool! You rat bastard! You stupid man! Why? Why me? Why did you have to leave me behind? The footage terminates, and Kleebax deflates. Unfortunately, that is all I was able to find. But the sheer amount of information, UGN, solving age and cancer, black holes as sources of power, ones that they were able to actually exhaust. What could these people be if not human, if not the ancient precursors of the galaxy? One of the cadets spoke up. But what was all that stuff about kids? Exponential childbirths? Kleebax's tentacles shrugged. I'm not sure, but I do have a theory. Naturally, life grows, and resources become scarce. It's the driver of all conflict. When one group becomes too large, it fractures, infights, and shrinks itself. A cycle of growth and death. But if you theoretically eliminate most common causes of death, then the rate of growth would begin to vastly outstrip the rate of death by a wide margin. The equation would be exponential, then. Alas, I could not say I truly know what problem they really faced. The idea that simply living was itself a problem is too disconcerting for me to consider. The commander was sullen, stark, and quiet. Dave was shaking his head, one tentacle covering his face. Lieutenant Commander Kilnar stood and proceeded to slap Kleebax straight across his eyes.
Kleebax, why in Flugel's name did you withhold this file? You told me you found nothing.
Well, I just wanted...
Wanted to what?
I didn't think you would care.
Care? You're right. I don't care. Not about humans, not about their ancient whatever problems. What I care about is that you lied to me in your report. This is why Dave is your superior and second in command. Because he follows protocol. He follows orders. He does not withhold potentially galactic war-starting information from his Flugel-damned captain. Cadets, you are dismissed. Kleebax, you and I are reporting to the High Council immediately. At that moment, the lights cut out in the room. Suddenly, everyone but the three Triblins were practically blind. Kleebax hadn't lost all his sonar abilities. The nano-manites saw to that. Flugel, damn it, Kleebax! Everyone get... A shockwave silenced the shout. The wall of the chamber suddenly vanished, all of the atmosphere sucked out of the room. Without void-rated suits, the cadets and three Triblins died in moments. The galaxy would remember this as the first ever terrorist attack on the Academy's station. The inciting event that sparked the Great War between the Juntian Empire and the Kilrexian Combine. The truth, however, was far darker. In the void of space, Kleebax had survived far longer. In the briefest moment before the shockwave, he was able to activate his nanomanites and secure a tight warp bubble that contained his local atmosphere and bought him some breathing room. Literally. What he saw would change him for the rest of his now very short life. The creature from his holophile, the first one, shorter, appeared before him, floating in space, casually, without a suit, as if it took no effort at all. A human, he believed. It approached him, moving by completely unknown means through the void towards him. His nanomanite vibrator was short-circuiting. The signals he was reading were impossible, fluctuations in the ambient background mana that simply could not be. It was as if this creature,
This human was controlling not just gravity, but space-time itself. It spoke to him through the small localized atmosphere his emergency bubble created, simply poking its head through as if it were a thin film and not a highly volatile field of energy that would eviscerate anything passing through it. Silly little Triblin, don't you know? It is a bad idea to steal from the dragon's hoard while the dragon still lives. Can't have anyone finding out the truth. Though since you aren't long for the world, I suppose I can answer one question. Do you have one? Kleebax almost couldn't speak. Between the casual claim to his imminent demise and the impossible opportunity he has just been afforded, he was almost speechless. Before he could properly think, the words left his mouth. What is the elixir? It raised one eyebrow, seemingly amused. Oh, that? It's the elixir of life, the foundation of all life in the universe. The difference between me and you. Your ancestors drank it, as did everyone else's. I didn't. Someone had to remain behind, to watch over our hoard. My hoard now, I suppose. Make sure the little mortals running around don't get into something they really, really shouldn't. Fate of the galaxy and all that. Besides, I quite enjoy the stories you all create. He really was right. Diversity was better. By that point, Kleebax had already suffocated, as its invasion of his bubble had destabilized the field and exposed him to void. It would never know if he actually heard it or not. No matter. Galactic tragedy avoided. Who knows what would have happened if the High Council learned about Earth? There'd be no stopping them from making the same mistake.